improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Hey, this is Brad Colbert. We are doing an AMA, and I'm opening the floor. No fluff, no filter, military, leadership, mindset, life after service, guns, generation kill, you name it. If you've got questions, send them to contact@bradcolbert.us before March 6th, 2026. Looking forward to hearing from you. Stay frosty.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Carry On Podcast SITREP edition for the week of February 26th. I am Brad Colbert, the Iceman, your host for the Carry On Podcast. As always, I wanted to take just a brief moment and thank a few people. First off, I would like to thank Andy Stumpf, the whole team at the Carry On Podcast, for hosting me on his show. Fantastic time and great discussion. I also want to mention that Andy has a book out. It is called Ground Proof. I haven't read it yet, but knowing what I've learned about Andy, I can only anticipate that it is impactful. One of the things that I appreciated about my discussion with Andy was the tremendous amount of integrity that he had. I don't find that as common as I once did. It is fairly centered towards military individuals, but it is not exclusive. So as a character trait, I think it is well earned. And so, yeah, go ahead and check out the Cleared Hot podcast hosted by Andy and check out his new book. I would also like to say thank you towards our latest Patreon subscriber, Josh. Thank you very much, Josh. I'm so glad that you have enjoyed the show and want to help support it. And for those of you that are interested, our Patreon subscription does carry some extra benefits. You'll have the early edition of podcast. You'll have access to the whiskey and bullshit. Of course, some unique swag for our Patreon subscribers, depending on the echelon that you would like to subscribe. So check it out. And if listening is your thing, please make sure that you subscribe to the show. It definitely helps us out. So, as is typical with us and our discussion, we like to do a once around the world, and then we're going to check in with a couple of emergent topics that I have selected for this week that have caught my attention and that I have done some extra homework on. So we usually start with CENTCOM, and today is no exception. CENTCOM covers the Middle East, for those of you that may have forgotten. I think a lot of us are aware of the current discussions taking place between Iran and the United States over a lot of different topics. And that is first and foremost of CENTCOM's AO at the moment. We have, according to the Associated Press, the largest Middle East force posture in decades, including 2 carrier strike groups. And we've talked about that before, but just to make sure that everyone is remembering, that is almost 100 fighter aircraft available to sortie. These are 4th and 5th generation fighters with a whole host of enablers like refuelers, EW aircraft. So it is not a small package. We also have, for the very first time, a deployment of F-22s to Israel. Now, the F-22s are your 5th generation fighter. These are absolutely the world's premier fixed wing aircraft. A lot of people say that they eclipse the F-35. If it wasn't for the fact that the F-22 assembly line has long been shuttered, we would probably be exporting the F-22 for the next 10 years. It is an amazing aircraft. And we now have a contingent of those based in Israel. Why Israel? Well, because many of the other Middle Eastern countries have forbidden us from basing out of their countries, fearing reprisals from Iran should this whole thing go kinetic. We've talked about it before, but just as a reminder, the Gerald Ford, the largest aircraft carrier in the United States Naval Fleet, is on deck as well. And it's not just the carrier, it's all of the support ships that go along with it. And when I say support, I don't mean beans, bullets, and Band-Aids. I mean there is a lethal component of frigates, destroyers, and cruisers and submarines that usually go along with that. So all of this implies that the escalation ladder is now becoming shorter and shorter. When you posture 2 carrier groups and 5th gen fighters a lot of the decision-making time that we would have goes away, and it increases the miscalculation risk. So there is a danger with having that much in that region. In previous episodes, we've talked about the potential for a catastrophic cascade of events. We are really getting to the precipice when it comes to an accident. Now, the Gulf partners have definitely constrained the United States in where we can base, countries that we can overfly, routing, and a lot of this pushes us towards this dispersal and access models, such as basing in Israel. I would expect also an increase in air and missile defense emphasis, a lot of maritime potential exists in the Strait of Hormuz, Arabian Sea, the Gulf. There is definitely going to be a premium on ISR, keeping tabs on the Iranian Guard Corps in that area, U.S. shipping, and any layered integrated air and missile defense. So that's CENTCOM in a nutshell. And no, I'm not going to joke with the spies like us, not spies like us, the Austin Powers in a nutshell. Let's go to Europe. Europe Command, Reuters is reporting that the U.S. and Ukrainian discussions in Geneva are focusing a lot on post-war reconstruction amid Russian mass strike activity on infrastructure. Russia continues to hammer the Ukrainian electrical grid, fuel supplies, forcing them into just absolute misery in the cold winter cycle, which fortunately for the Ukrainians is slowly coming to an end, but it is not easy fighting. Having done training in a cold, wet, mountainous environment, as I have mentioned before, it is about the worst possible thing that you can do. So I definitely sympathize and empathize with the Ukrainians on the front. They are definitely taking the brunt of the Russian attack. Congress is also signaling the bipartisan resolution, at least according to Reuters, to help remain pro-Ukrainian. A lot of the U.S. rhetoric under the Trump administration has been to cold shoulder the Ukrainians. There is a grassroots movement in Congress to try and give them a lifeline, so to speak. And I hope that it goes through. I really don't think that we are doing the Ukrainians the service that we owe them. So separately, in parallel, European Command publicly has stated that the U.S. and Russia have agreed to reestablish high-level military-to-military dialogue. This is something we've mentioned as well. Just a reminder, this is to sort of risk mitigate. It prevents any misunderstandings between Russia and the United States when we supply intelligence, ISR, arms shipments, logistics, advisors. If we're going to overfly anything that is Russian interest, we tell them and they tell us, and it sort of prevents this misunderstanding, this escalation. Really, if you think about all of the things that are taking place in Europe, the United States is really running two tracks. We are sustaining the Ukrainians politically, but we're also putting in these guide rails to reduce this inadvertent Russia escalation. If CENTCOM continues to burden shift towards Europe like they have signaled they are, Europe is going to continue to have to do this sort of self-analysis to see what they need to shift to defense spending to take on the burden that the United States heretofore took on. And a lot of think tanks are saying they can't do it. There's a lot of analysts that say that these NATO member countries, these smaller ones that don't have the powerhouse economy of, say, a United States or, well, a Germany, a UK, or French, they're not going to be able to spend the percentage of the GDP that the U.S. is demanding that they spend commensurate with the original NATO agreement. I don't know what that's going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years. A lot of these adjustments are projected not, out till 2030, 2035. So it's going to be a completely different administration at that time, and it may be a completely different paradigm. Who knows? Let's move on to Indo-Pacific. You have a U.S., Philippines, and Australia maritime cooperative activity. It has triggered, according to Stripes, a Chinese response. They have done some freedom of navigation exercises, some overflights, but they've done a lot of public, not condemnation, but, we're very concerned and, this is upsetting and this is destabilizing, the usual playbook. Interesting, the U.S. has reported, Indo-Pacific has reported that a U.S. transport aircraft had an incident during this Philippine contingency training. It landed and took off from an austere runway. And that's basically a road, anything that's not a declared paved runway. So for those of us that aren't immersed in this, if you have to land an aircraft on a highway or a road or anywhere, a grass field that is not typically designed to take on an aircraft, it's something that you want to practice. And this exists as a contingency in the event that a normal airport is not available, it is not serviceable, maybe it's been cratered, maybe a natural disaster has taken it out. It is very common for short takeoff and landing capable aircraft to practice this maneuver. Well, there was a U.S. transport aircraft that was practicing this on an alternate landing zone. They landed fine. They went to take off and they hit a concrete barrier. The plane essentially crashed before it took off, injuring 5 Americans. This was coordinated with the Philippine civilian police and military. This was planned. This was part of our interoperability training. And this sort of thing, unfortunately, it happens sometimes. I have not been in the aircraft when some of these have taken place, but I have been on the ground helping to vector them in when this has taken place. So I'm very familiar with the mechanics of a short takeoff and landing in an austere airport or an austere runway. So I can certainly understand how this would happen. But it is needed to continue this interoperability training. The U.S. and Japan did a mine warfare exercise activity and other Indo-Pacific maritime activities. That is also something that took place during our reporting window in Indo-Pacific, and then kind of closes it out. And all of this implies the continuing denial of China for easy targeting of runways, ports, partners, and we want to continue to do this cooperative joint military and civilian, in some cases, training to bolster friendship with a lot of the countries that we need to have on our side, and also to send a very strong signal towards China, basically, fuck off. Yeah. By the way, in case any of you are interested, I'm having a beer this evening instead of my normal brown liquor, an IPA. That tends to be my beer of choice in most days that I drink beer, and today's no exception. So, cheers. Indo-Pacific is going to continue demanding ISR support, submarine support, long-range fires. But unfortunately, as you know, CENTCOM has the bulk of naval assets and in some cases fixed wing. That's sort of crowding out the Indo-Pacific. Moving over to AFRICOM, multiple coordinated strikes with Somali's government, again targeting Shabaab and ISIS Somalia. That took place in mid-Feb. Just want to quickly recap it. The implications, as you can assume, are Africa remains low visibility but high persistent fighting, and it is probably going to continue on for the foreseeable future. So moving on to SOUTHCOM, we had kinetic strikes against vessels. These narco-terrorism vessels that we have talked about, for the last couple of months now, right? Strikes took place on the 23rd of February, also on the February 16th, but we talked about that one. This is the Associated Press reporting regional seizures, contrasting with and contextualizing U.S. lethal interdiction activity. We have no compunctions about kinetic strikes, but we also have no reservations about visit, board, search, and seizure. All of this applies that this is the new policy. This is not an anomaly. Maritime interdiction is being normalized as a strategic tool. There are risks inherent in that. By normalizing this as a strategic tool for domestic consumption, we're also normalizing it for our adversaries as well. So those chickens may come home to roost. We'll see. I also think that reputational cost and partner hesitation risk also rise when we do things like this. There's been no real strong vocal outpouring since the Venezuelan incident took place about our maritime interdictions, but I think that's because a lot of the world is fixated on Iran. When that normalizes and or stabilizes, you will probably see attention swinging back over towards incidents like this, when it's a slow news day. Yeah. So I think right now the military, it's operating a very global, distributed, high-tempo posture. Definitely the decisive swing is towards CENTCOM and these talks tied to Iran and deterrence, but we also have a lot of other irons in the fire. I think that from what I have read, open source, and just so you're clear, if I haven't made it clear in the past, open source is information that is not compartmentalized or classified. It is things that can be aggregated in a public domain. So Freedom of Information Act requests to government agencies would be an example of open source. Things that you can read in a book, look up in the library, find on the internet, or word of mouth towards a credible report, all are open source. I will never divulge anything that is compartmentalized or classified in this discussion. I just won't do it. So, sort of a caveat and somewhat tangential, just so everyone's understanding. When I say open source, that's what I mean, right? Most of the consequential details, like the rules of engagement, the basing permissions, the target packages, it's classified. So these caps, these synopsis about once around the world, it comes from a variety of sources. I tend to trust the wire services the most. So you're talking about the Associated Press, Reuters, and others like that are credible, reputable, and usually sourced pretty ethically, in the sense that you can trust it's not just single source reporting, but it's multiple. It's usually cross-referenced and checked, and they're weighted. So, yeah. So that's the once around the world for this week. Not a tremendous amount going on. So let's pivot towards Mexico. You would have to have lived under a rock to not at least anecdotally know what took place in Mexico the last couple of days. It just executed what is probably the single highest value strike of the modern cartel war. Some are saying the most important strike in the last 2 decades. We have captured cartel members before, El Chapo being the last public one, but nothing quite like this. And there was a huge U.S. influence behind it, which we'll get to here in a minute. Basically, CJNG, this cartel that has propped up in Mexico, probably one of the largest and definitely the most brutal cartels that exist in Mexico, headed by, I'm going to murder this guy's name because, as you know about me, I don't speak foreign and I sure as fuck don't speak Mexican. Nemesio El Mencho Oseguera Cervantes. And that's being generous, by the way. That earned me another swig of IPA. He's dead. Yep, he's dead. A federal military operation near Jalisco on the February 22nd. They were immediately answered back. Hold on, I want to use the young kids speak. They were immediately clapped back by the CJNG with coordinated multi-state govern deniability attacks. So we're talking roadblocks, vehicle arsons, and intimidation, all signaling continuity and to deter further pressure from the government. I would say the next 30 to 90 days is where Mexico is either going to exploit the victory and further degrade the cartel, or they're going to eat a fragmentation spiral because the cartel is going to splinter. There's going to be a power vacuum while their lieutenants fight for the new seat, and there's going to be wider violence. So this is extraordinarily delicate right now. They can exploit this victory In military terms, what would typically be happening right now is, your reserve force would be deployed to overrun, to further encircle, to continue the attack, to exploit the victory as much as possible. I don't know if Mexico has the cojones, see what I did there, to do that or not, but we'll find out. So let's look at what has been confirmed or at least widely reported. So Almencho was killed, as I said, during a federal operation to capture him. So from the onset, it was designed as a capture mission. This all took place in Jalisco, one of the Mexican states, and he was wounded. While he was being transported, he died during an air transfer. So life flight landed essentially, took him on to a secondary location, and he died en route. I could give two fucks. I really could. I would have loved to seen the guy stand trial. I think that it would have been justifiable. It definitely would have been extremely cathartic. But the fact that he's dead means very little to me. So in response, his cartel instituted what is called a narco bloqueus. In English, it means narco blockade. And let's just stick with that. It's a violent tactical maneuver used by drug cartels in Mexico to shut down major roads, highways, sometimes city centers. I spoke to a friend of mine who happened to have been vacationing during the time that before, during, and after this took place. And they said that they saw in the 12 hours leading up to the attack, Mexican National Guard or Mexican military, they weren't exactly sure, patrolling the streets. And this was a resort town. You don't see this kind of thing happen in a resort town. So a lot of people were, what's going on? And this was 12 hours prior, and then maintained that presence throughout the entire time that they were there until they flew back home. I'm playing the pronoun game because I'm trying to obfuscate the identity of the individual because I did not ask if I could talk about them in the show. Point being is that I think that the Mexican government anticipated a backlash and had a plan for it. Now, whether that was suggested by U.S. forces or through their own government is unknown and I guess really incidental. The blockades involved seizing vehicles like passenger buses, trucks, private cars, and then you set them on fire. Yeah, it's fantastic. Creates blazing obstacles, disruptions, and this not just took place across Jalisco, it took place across a large portion of Mexico and other states. And it affects mobility, it affects public order. It's a display of force. And then, of course, immediately, what did you have happen? You had force protection spike. You had press that were down there covering this. Their risks spiked immediately. In fact, Reporters Without Borders documented 8 cases of journalists that were assaulted, threatened, or robbed while covering the unrest on February 22nd. In response, Mexico deploys an additional 2,000 troops after the violence. I don't think that's enough. What I have read is that the drug cartels are on par, oftentimes better equipped than the Mexican troops that are facing off with them. They have, I read a pretty credible report that said that they have in their possession surface-to-air missiles. And I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know how sophisticated they are. I mean, they're probably surplus Russians, but it'll still bring down a helicopter. It'll still bring down an aircraft. Yeah. So looking at the timeline of this, which started off on February 22nd, which was Sunday, they engage Almencho. He's wounded. He dies. Official statements say that he's dead. And immediately you have retaliation of roadblocks, arsons, and counter mobility. On 23rd, Monday, significant security forces rise up. You have some casualties. 25 soldiers are killed in those casualties. Clashes following the raid. That's all through Monday on the February the 23rd. Now, the 24th, Mexico deploys an additional 2,000 troops to Jalisco to stabilize the unrest. Doesn't exactly work, but that's kind of the status quo where we are right now. I think the Mexican government's approach to this is cordon and contain. They're not going to go in there en masse and risk further escalation. But also, I don't think the Mexican military, I'm going to use it twice, has the cojones to go in there and go toe to toe with these folks. I could be wrong. I just don't think they're going to. Now, here's what is interesting and encouraging, and it has a lot of second and third order effects. And that is February 22nd, all the way till today, the U.S. officials have officially acknowledged a large intelligence support package was responsible for the targeting of El Mencho. And this is Reuters that's reporting this. There is a new U.S. military-led intelligence group which aided the hunt primarily from this interagency task force counter cartel, the JIATFCC, with significant targeting support from the CIA. This is a new group established by the U.S. Department of Defense in early 2026, operating under Northern Command out of Fort Huachuca, Arizona. And it maps out, its job is to map out cartel networks, according to U.S. officials. That is the official press release. I love this, by the way. I fucking love it. Say what you will about the administration. And I know there's a lot of anti-Trumpers out there, and I'm not anti or pro. I pick and choose my battles, because I pride myself on being an independent thinker. This is amazing. Trump said he was pivoting attention towards our hemisphere, and it's been happening in real time. I am so pro border security. I have absolutely no compunctions about U.S., and I've said this before, special operations forces being greenlit to go down to Mexico and fuck shit up. Is the U.S. responsible for the drug war? Yeah, we are. We're one of the largest consumers on the planet of drugs, regardless of the vector and regardless of the country that they flow in from. But it could be a two-pronged approach. You can go down to Mexico and burn the poppy fields and the coca fields. And man, this is going to piss some of you off, but the marijuana fields as well. I don't have a problem with it. Because the narco state is responsible for human trafficking. It is responsible for a huge amount of corruption and graft and poor living conditions and the erasure of the middle class. Yeah, there's going to be some second and third order effects, but I couldn't care less. I really couldn't. The CIA was reported to be instrumental in this one. It provided critical intelligence that allowed Mexico, the Mexican special forces anyways, to locate El Mencho. We train a lot of their SF folks. Our intelligence drove this strike package. I think it's fantastic, and I'm not surprised. And I honestly have to stop and ask, why haven't we done this sooner, and why aren't we doing more of this? According to a former U.S. official who spoke off the record, not to me, there was a wire service that I am parroting. It confirmed that the U.S. intelligence and law enforcement compiled together a detailed target package for the Mexican government, identifying the location of the cartel boss, pattern of life, the anticipated resistance that they could expect to have. Now, no U.S. forces participated in the raid. No boots on the ground, but my God, you all but handed on a silver platter El Mencho, thanks to U.S. intelligence preparation of the battlefield. Brilliant. If you think about the operational picture of the CJNGs, you need to look at it in kind of a military context. They are responding less with revenge than command and control signaling. They're trying to tell the Mexican government that they're still relevant, they're still in charge, they're not to be fucked with, they're not going to allow for a further kill or capture on any of their lieutenants or second and third order in the chain of command. That's what most of this, let's set cars on fire, let's set up checkpoints, let's take pot shots at some of the security forces. Now, what their TTPs are up till now, these burning vehicles and roadblocks, it's all designed to slow down the troop movement. It's designed to isolate pockets. It's designed to create the appearance of state paralysis. It also has some spillover into economic coercion when you talk about tourism. The friend that I spoke with that vacationed or was vacationing in Mexico, coincidentally, before, during, and after, they did see guests, or they have talked to guests, observed guests, I don't know, I'm not sure how to phrase that, who left, who were in fear of their safety and bailed. Mexico relies on a huge amount of tourism. So this kind of thing does put pressure on the Mexican government. It is putting a cost on civilians who would typically be neutral as well, because they rely on, the Mexican government relies on tourism, but the individual Mexican citizen relies on tourism. Yes, the government as a whole gets taxes and other funding from the byproduct of tourism, but it's that individual Mexican citizen whose business is probably operating on a razor thin margin, and things like this just dry up tourism. So it's economic coercion, and it is a tool that they are using. You also have information dominance and fear, such as this rapid photogenic violence. It sort of projects this "we still run Bartertown" mentality, and it's working. You also have media suppression. I said that you had up to about 8 reporters who were assaulted, robbed, harassed. That intimidation reduces independent verification. It increases rumors, and it allows for terror effects. When you can't have reporting on the ground, like we saw during the protests in Iran, what you're left with is rumor, conjecture, assumption. And a lot of times those assumptions are wrong. These are the kind of TTPs that the cartel wants to use. It will continue to exploit. Now, the state posture, putting in these troops, now 4,000, it tells you that Mexico expects further reprisals. And I think they're right. As the lieutenants fight each other for the top dog position, I think you're going to see a lot more assassinations. I think you're going to see a lot more conflict. And I think this is going to be pretty kinetic for several more weeks to come. How it affects the United States, it's multifaceted. It's not just Mexico's internal war. It's now openly tied to Mexico's U.S. pressure and collaboration. One of the things that Mexico has tried to do is to play this really duplicitous game of, we don't kowtow to the United States, we are our own country, we are sovereign, and then quietly they are susceptible to a lot of pressure from the United States. I mean, let's be honest. We're the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and we know it. They are our southern border neighbor, and they need simple things like trade. They need money. They need military advisors and equipment, and there's a lot. The implication here is that the cartel can now frame this event as their Mexican national sovereignty under assault. And this is propaganda fuel. Mexico has to show that it is not operating as a U.S. subordinate while still needing United States ISR and intelligence advantages. And I think that this group, this joint intelligence organization that was recently stood up in January, operating out of Fort Huachuca, is going to continue to take center stage in the intelligence prep for a lot more of these strike packages. And I love it. As I've said, I am sorry to digress to the opinions, but I think this is a good thing. Look for 3 different outcomes based off of what took place Sunday. There's either going to be an orderly succession for who is next in line to take over the cartel, and the violence kind of stabilizes to the background level that it was before, which, oh, by the way, was a lot. Okay. I am not vacationing in Mexico, but then I am shockingly Caucasian. So I'm a juicy target. There's a lot. There's a lot of violence that takes place in Mexico, just in the background. That's best case scenario, what happens? Second, fragmentation. You get splinters. The cartel breaks up into subgroups. You have this turf war. And in the process, there's going to be a lot more collateral damage, a lot higher civilians. Short disruption doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a better outcome, but potentially, given the scale and the coordination of the reprisals, plus this troop surge that's taken place from the Mexican government, I think that the near term leans towards fragmentation, either inside the CJNG or from a rival cartel. So either a rival cartel eats them or they're going to splinter. That's my thought anyways. I think that in order to prove otherwise, they're going to have to either prove they can still finance, they can still command territory, they can still punish the Mexican state for what they've done, and they can still deter infections within their own ranks. This kind of thing is what drives the foot soldiers to find a new gang. So I would expect to see more counter-mobility attacks and selective assassinations. That's my thought anyways. There's more on this. It's going to affect a lot of the things that we talked about, terrorism. I think it's going to be packaged by the Mexican government as a win. It's not going to do anything to change the paradigm of corruption and graft in the Mexican government. And I'm not just slagging off the Mexican government or the Mexican nationals or the Mexican citizen. I'm just saying this is a country that has a long and sordid history of corruption. And I don't think this is going to move the needle one iota, but it's one less asshole in the world. So, keep it up, Mexico. Well done. I think we'll leave it there. I don't want to forecast what's going to take place in the next 30 to 60 days beyond what I've already said, because I think it's too far forward. So let's shift our focus here for a moment. I do want to talk just a little bit about some of the things that are taking place in Iran. This was a story that I picked up a little while back. I've kind of been saving it. For about 2 years now, China has been in negotiations with Iran over the sale of a hypersonic missile, the CM-302. It's robust. It is well made. It has a range of right around 290 kilometers, which is pretty decent. The reason why it's been in the works for 2 years is because China has kind of really slow walked the sale of this, because things have been pretty politically toxic between Iran and the rest of the world for the last, for a while now, but it has spiked under the current administration. China did not want to get on the bad side of U.S. trade, of U.S. not embargoes, and tariff wars. There's a lot of things that China could run afoul of if they were seen as breaking the military embargo against Iran. And I think that's part and parcel of why they've kind of slow rolled this. Reuters has been the one that reported it first, and it's kind of the one that I've been following, although several other news agencies have picked it up and ran with it, and I've tried to read as much as I could on it. But this supersonic anti-ship cruise missile, the CM-302, there's no delivery date that has been agreed upon by China. But if it is in fact executed, this is going to completely change Iran's, God, I almost called it Iraq. I do that all the time. Iran's sea denial tool set. This is a very difficult missile to defend against. It flies very fast, very erratically, very low to the waterline, and it is extraordinarily difficult for surface vessels to mitigate. It's a threat, and it's a no-kidding threat. And there are, if they possess it, should they possess it, it would force the U.S. Navy to change its defensive posture because it is so difficult to defend against. Not impossible. I'm just saying it's difficult. They would have to change their posture. They would have to disperse the ships a little more. They would have to move farther off the coast, which means that ranges are increased for fixed-wing aircraft and for missile launches, refueling. It adds a whole nother layer. The U.S. political layer is already reacting. So the House Select Committee on China, the chair of that committee has publicly called for tougher trade postures against China already and is signaling that this is going to become sanctions and we are going to interdict. We'll talk about that in a second. And then manage the escalation. So this is not just, China is could potentially illegally sell missiles to a country that is really not somebody that should be having these. It's more than that. Because in order to, you can't make China not do it. Even with the tools in our toolbox, you can't make China do it. Really, the only thing you can do is sanction the ever-loving shit out of every company that makes any component that goes into the manufacture of this anti-ship missile. And then you seize at sea any of these components and any of the finished products. So if we go back and look at the timeline a little bit, let's go back to 12 December of 25. Reuters first reports on a Wall Street Journal article describing U.S. interdictions. Now, I don't remember this article. I went back and I read the article again. I read the article for the first time, but I don't remember this hitting my radar in December. But apparently, we had a group of special operations forces who boarded a ship in the Indian Ocean that was en route from China to Iran. They seized and then destroyed military-related components, and then they let the ship continue. These military components were components that were needed for the completion of this anti-ship hypersonic missile. Again, this flew completely under my radar. Yeah. So I went back, read the article, and I went, well, that's interesting. Because this is an interesting precedent. The U.S. is now saying that it is willing to touch the supply chain at sea when China is selling illegal military hardware towards Iran. If we even suspect that there's cargo on that ship. Now, I don't know if the ship in question, if the flagged country of which it was declared gave permission. I don't know if the U.S. notified the company that owned the boat. My suspicion is that they didn't. I think intelligence told them that these components were on there and they went and they fucked it up. All right. So let's move forward to the 24th of February. Again, Reuters is reporting that Iran nears a deal. Their words, not mine. They are nearing a deal for these CM-302 missiles. These missiles, again, are designed to evade defenses by flying very low, very fast. The deal, according to Reuters, is near completion, but there's no delivery date set. That's the article that I read most recently. That's the one that kind of hit my radar and caused me to dig deeper into this story because this is pretty serious. This is a real game changer for not just Iran, but for the entire Gulf region. With that much range, you're not just threatening U.S. ships parked in the Persian Gulf. You can threaten quite a bit and disrupt shipping and threaten peer and near peer adversaries. 24 Feb, same day, the House Select Committee starts talking about sanctions, about calling for revoking China's trade status. And that's politically, that's a pretty big round to fire when you start talking about sanctions and revoking trade status. February 24th and 25th, Maritime Executive contextualizes the reporting system about the Gulf. I'm trying to think how to phrase this so that it's not too wonky. The export variant is linked to the YJ-12 family. When you start talking about specific warheads, and they're parsing it out where they may allow China to sell the body, but not the warhead. It's complicated. Skip over that one. Instead, I would like to speak about the countries that are affected by all of this. Iran is going to be the recipient. If Iran gets this missile, then the IRGC Navy gets this missile. They are now capable of denying transit through the entire Strait of Hormuz, through the Gulf, through Oman. They are threatening shipping within that circular range, depending on where they're based, of about 290 kilometers. There's a lot of other states that are responsible for ensuring that this doesn't happen. It doesn't just fall on the United States. Oman, they have a large exposure to this. The United Arab Emirates does, clearly the United States, and then obviously China as the supplier role. But who exactly is responsible for making sure that these components do not find their way into the hands of Iran is somewhat amorphous. And that's really the question that no one's been able to answer. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, really, to an extent as well, all have risk, skin in the game if this missile should fall into Iranian hands. Israel does, but tangentially. India and Sri Lanka actually do as well, tangentially. The tertiary impact also hits the United Kingdom, it hits the UK, it hits Japan, South Korea. All of this is impacting energy prices. It impacts maritime coalition participation. It impacts insurance. So who, out of all of the individual states that I mentioned that have some kind of skin in the game, who's responsible for preventing this from happening? Who's responsible for Gulf maritime security? It shouldn't just fall strictly onto the United States. I'm struggling to understand why, with so many people that can be affected by this happening, the United States is consistently the only one that stands up in the room and says, not just no, but fuck no. You have this Gulf security architecture, but it's patchwork. It's national navies, it's a U.S. presence, but it's this ad hoc coalition with commercial shipping, self-protection as well. So individual shipping companies, regardless of what state they're flagged under, take personal security measures. Is it their job? When Iran is capable of denying shipping like this, there has to be one throat to choke, so to speak. You need rules of engagement. You need convoy policy. You need interdiction authority. And you don't have any of that right now. You have this distributed responsibility, and that's unset. I don't think that the United States should be the only one that decides that Iran should not have a missile that is, first off, banned. And it's not just the United States that decided that Iran shouldn't have this. I mean, we had a United Nations charter that said, no, Iran, you have shown yourself to be grossly irresponsible as an adult, and you are at the kids' table. And that's just what it's going to be like. The problem is that China is just going to deny it, and Iran's going to lie about it. And then you have these intermediaries that can smuggle components piecemeal into Iran, and paperwork can be forged. And the result of that is what happened in December of 2025, where you had special forces interdict at sea known components, destroy it, and then told the ship it can go on its way. But that's not how it should be done. Yeah, we're willing to do it, but it's not how it should be done. Congress, still calling for revoking trade status last I checked, but it just raises expectations, but it doesn't help anything. Trying to think if there's anything on this subject that I still want to bring to light before putting it to bed, so to speak. I just feel like it's underscored that this requires such a change in tactics. It requires us to really increase a lot of our standoff, like I said, but also a lot more decoys, electronic warfare posturing. And then we're going to have to sanction China again. And I just thought we were getting over a lot of the tariff that we had put on China and a lot of the trade negotiations. And this is just going to, whatever. We'll see. I don't like it. Not one bit. I think this is grossly irresponsible of China, especially considering the history and precedent that Iran has shown towards the rest of the world. I think it's disruptive to energy markets. It threatens shipping. It does a lot. It's not just the United States is angry at Iran. Iran is trying to get a weapon that the United States doesn't want them to get. No, it's global. This affects global. And I think that it is up to the Gulf Cooperation Council, this, how many? I want to say it's eight states, 8 Middle East, founded in 81. It's like 8 Middle Eastern countries who are responsible for, security in the Gulf. It's the Security Alliance. No, six Arabian states. I think it's their fault. I don't know why they're not considering the sea denial. Okay, let's leave that one alone for now. That's enough about that. I want to end with this story that I have been watching for a while, a long time. There was a portion of my life where I worked in Pakistan, and in my time there, learned a little bit about this, that, and the other. And it was the first time that I learned about TTP. And no, that is not in the U.S. military parlance of tactics, techniques, and procedures. It is the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or as I'm going to call it, TTP or Taliban in Pakistan. So recently in the news, and this is kind of why I'm talking about it, because it's topical, right? The Pakistani government has been launching airstrikes into Afghanistan, targeting Taliban Pakistan locations and ISIS-K in Afghanistan. Now, they have been at it for a while to various degrees, but there has really this year, like end of last year and throughout this year, been an uptick of Pakistan targeting TTP and ISIS-K infrastructure in Afghanistan. And the United Nations assistance mission in Afghanistan and the Taliban government both, so fucking stupid. I can't even believe I have to say that. I gotta wash my mouth out every time I say it. The Taliban government in Afghanistan. Yeah, there shouldn't be one, Biden. They both report civilian casualties. And look, every time there's a strike, anytime there's an attack, the receiver of the attack will always claim civilian casualties. The sad reality is most of the time they're right. But there's also a portion where it's just pure bullshit and propaganda. I wasn't on the ground. Reporting is coming secondhand. So let's just say that the United Nations assistance mission in Afghanistan and the Taliban authorities are correct, and that there were civilian casualties, but there's also been civilian casualties on both sides because border forces have been exchanging fire for a while. And this, what's happening right now between Pakistan and the TTP and ISIS-K in Afghanistan, is a classic setup for a retaliation loop where one side hits you and the other side hits back, and it just goes on and on and on. So let's just kind of zoom out for a moment. We'll look at the timeline, and I want to talk a little bit about the history, because you may have no historical context for the TTP. And honestly, the only reason I do is just by pure circumstance. February 17th. Let's start there for now. We're going to go a little farther back here in a minute. February 17th, the TTP, these militants, they ram an explosive-laden vehicle. So you have a vehicle-borne IED, suicide bomber. They ram this vehicle into an army checkpoint, a Pakistani army checkpoint in the Bajour district in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Pakistan is divided into states. So this is in the Khyber, the state of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, district of Bajour. 11 security people are dead. 1 child killed, 7 wounded. No, that's fact. It's been reported. It's been photographed. It is a fact. February 21st and 22nd, so it was an overnight attack. Pakistan retaliates. They conduct airstrikes in eastern Afghanistan. Their security minister describes it as intelligence-based selective targeting of 7 camps, all of which they claim were tied to TTP and ISIS-K. We're going to talk about ISIS-K here in a minute, so don't raise your hand. I see it. Like, what is ISIS-K? Hold on, I'll get to you. February 22nd, Taliban authorities in Kabul condemned the strike, claimed that women and children were among the casualties, and they vow to respond. Reuters has said that the strike is seen as a sharp escalation shortly after a Saudi-mediated release of these 3 Pakistani soldiers who were being held by the TTP in Afghanistan. It was meant to reduce tensions. So Saudi Arabia is pretty pissed because they had just recently negotiated between TTP and Pakistan the release of 3 of these soldiers. And then Pakistan, what did they do? They did airstrikes. But it's like, dude, you bombed our checkpoint first. So what did you expect? February 23rd is when UNAMA, the UN, right, cites credible reports that the strike killed 13 civilians and injured 7. They also hit a region, Paktika. Now, the Afghan ministries claim that a madras was hit, which is a religious school. If you're not familiar, the casualties and the infrastructure damage is photographed, but Reuters has not been able to independently verify. And kind of like I said earlier on in the show, I take a lot of my news sources from the wire services. So AP, Reuters, and other like-minded services. If it's not, I usually call it out. I'm a big believer in multiple source reporting before I declare something as credible. So let's move up. Let's talk about Tuesday, February 24th. Pakistan and Afghan forces, they exchange fire along the border. Each are blaming the other for initiating the clash. And this is exactly what I said earlier, this retaliation loop. That's everything up until today, essentially. There's no reporting that I could find beyond Tuesday of this week. So I love this issue just because of how it's so, oh my God, it's so fucked up. Let's look at history here. Like, this is the kind of thing that I need Maury Povich in on because it's that dysfunctional. This reads like something that you would watch back in the 90s on daytime television. You need a chart just to keep up with all of the shifting alliances. I want to give a little bit of history about the people involved in this drama. We'll start with the TTP, or the Pakistani Taliban. Officially formed from various militant factions all the way back in December of 2007 under a guy by the name of Masood, who was later killed. It's an umbrella organization for all of these militant groups fighting the Pakistani state and the Pakistani military. It emerged in response to military operations against militants in the tribal area. This subject, in and of itself, could take you a semester of college to really wrap your head around. I'm going to try to give you this in about 30 minutes. So I am going to do you a disservice. If you want to learn more, it's all out there in the internet. Read it. It's incredibly toxic of a story. There is an area between the countries of Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's a tribal area. It is Pashtun. It is disputed by both sides, and a little bit of China, really, right? They have skin in the game too. Everybody does. Pakistani military during the U.S. war on terror would consistently, based off of U.S. intelligence, sometimes led by U.S., do strikes in that tribal area. The individual Pashtuns who were there got really upset at this. And out of all of that mess, the Pakistani Taliban formed in response to this. Their aim is to enforce Sharia law and depose the Pakistani government, resulting in this long-running insurgency all the way back. Really, yeah, you can say January, December of 2007, but it's 2008. Now, it's ridiculous on its face, okay? Like I said, I've lived and worked in Pakistan. I will tell you that you're not going to conduct an insurgency against a country that has thousands of aircraft, hundreds of thousands of fighters, tanks, armored personnel carriers, Navy ships, right? You're just not. But you go, buddy. I mean, like, God damn. On the one hand, I admire the zealot, and on the other hand, I'm just blown away by how fucking stupid you are. Now, you know the TTP, even if you don't know the TTP. They were the ones responsible for the 2008 Marriott hotel bombing in Islamabad. That little puppy killed over 50 people, 3 of which were Americans. By the way, I have eaten at that hotel. It's since been put together since 2008. Great brunch. But I digress. So at this point, you're like, oh, there's 2 Talibans? Yeah. And even though they may be cut from the same cloth, their goals are completely different. And they don't exactly get along, despite the fact that many of the TTP leaders were foot soldiers in the Taliban currently in charge in Kabul. Oh, and guess where all the leaders know each other from? I'm going to murder this name. I used to know this one. The Jamia Darul Uloom Haqqaniya. It is a madrasa, and it is not in Afghanistan. It is in Pakistan. It is about 100 kilometers from the Afghan border, as a matter of fact. It is located in Pakistan, and it is this Islamic seminary or madrasa, frequently nicknamed the University of Jihad, because all of the Haqqani network and Taliban leaders were assumed or credited with, I don't know how you would package that one, to come out of this mosque. So that's the TTP. They have a record. ISIS-K, or now they know by a couple of different names. ISKP, it's a regional branch of the Islamic State, ISIS, Daesh. You've heard of them. They are part of the same organization. This active terrorist group, they mostly operate in Central and South Asia. Their aim is to establish a caliphate. Shocker. And here's a twist. They fight against the Taliban. Yeah. So ISIS-K and the Taliban, the one that's running Kabul, by the way, they don't get along at all. ISIS, part of their mandate, in addition to the caliphate, is to destroy the Taliban. But yet you have Pakistani Taliban and ISIS-K kind of working together. If you're diagramming this, get another pen. The relationship between ISKP, or let's just call them ISIS-K, and the TTP, very complex. It shifts between tactical cooperation and ideological competition. They disagree on the implementation of Sharia law in some cases, and that disagreement has not just started fistfights, but gunfights. rather than this straightforward partnership. So I think sometimes they work together, sometimes they don't. ISIS-K was founded way back in 2015 by a former TTP commander, by the way. The two groups have recently had this tense competitive relationship, with ISIS-K actively criticizing the TTP. It gets worse. Pakistan was once friends with the Taliban. In fact, they were the ones that many people have attributed towards the creation of the Taliban. This has to go all the way back towards the Soviet Union, their invasion of Afghanistan, the Mujahideen, Pakistan funding the Mujahideen, that whole thing ending, the Taliban coming out of that, and on and on and on. This is a crazy history. I do not have time to get into it, so stick with me as I gloss over the wave tops. Taliban, the one that's running Kabul, Afghanistan, and currently in charge, thanks to Joe Biden, they are currently on the outs over this whole thing that goes back to 2023, really. They're on the outs with Pakistan, their former benefactor and best buddy. They're now courting India. Afghanistan is in talks with India, which pisses off Pakistan horribly because India and Pakistan hate each other. And then there's China in the mix. Did we mention China? Yeah, China has infrastructure projects with both the Afghanistans and the Pakistanis. 5 Chinese engineers were recently killed thanks to an attack by TTP. China has said, whoa, we're going to pump the brakes on the billions of dollars that we were using towards infrastructure and a whole bunch of mining operations in Pakistan until you can guarantee our citizens' safety. And who can blame them, right? Massive economic interest in both countries. China's about to bail over the 5 Chinese people killed. If you're lost at this point, it's so much more complex. All of this really goes back to the late 1900s when the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan was drawn by British colonial rule. The Afghanis have never recognized that border because it goes right through the Pashtun tribal lands. I'm telling you, this is crazy, crazy. But let's leave that for the moment. Let's stick with current events. That's as much history as I think anyone can stomach at this point. And let's go back to where the attacks are specifically happening. You have the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, like I said, in the Bajir district. That's where your checkpoint attack happened. Your high counterterrorism churn zone right along that Afghan-Pakistan border. On the Afghanistan side of the house, where did the attacks happen? Eastern, Bashud, Khojani districts. That's where the UN is reporting most of the civilian casualties. That's where the aftermath strike has been photographed in Bashud. The attacks in the Paktika province, that's in the southeast. That's Afghanistan education. Ministry references casualties towards the religious school, the educational centers, but that's also the one that Reuters could not verify whether it had actually been struck by Pakistani aircraft. This whole border seam escalation corridor is a 2,600 kilometer stretch. That's this friction line between Pakistan and Afghanistan, where all of this conflict has been taking place. Now, Pakistan is claiming that they have conclusive evidence that these attacks were directed by Afghan-based leadership and handlers. Kabul repeatedly denies it. It says that they have not allowed the TTP to use Afghan soil for these attacks. And that is that's the argument at the diplomatic level. No mutually accepted mechanism exists to verify, compel, or deconflict any of this. The U.S., we'll get to that in a minute, actually. I don't want to jump ahead. When all of these internal attacks spike, Pakistani's leadership has this sort of horns dilemma. It's a no-win, right? Do they absorb the blows and look weak, or do they strike across the border and risk civilian casualties and then further Taliban retaliation? It's a no-win situation. The unknown problem in all of this truly is the ISIS-K and the border ecosystem, because even when the TTP is the main kinetic actor, the fear of ISIS-linked mass casualty terrorism inside Pakistan it's worrying everybody. Neither side can credibly guarantee the suppression of the ISIS-K network because they're so much more diffuse and opportunistic than a single insurgent chain of command like you have with the TTP. The ISIS-K, these are savages, and they're so religiously bent. It's really hard to anticipate. It's really hard to predict what they're going to do and when they're going to do it. And the fact that everybody fucking hates everybody and is backstabbing everyone, and it's these transient alliances. At the one hand, it's great if you're trying to write a thesis. It's really horrible if you're trying to predict foreign policy. And that brings us to the U.S. foreign policy implications. You talk about any sustained exchange of fire raises this risk of miscalculation between a nuclear-armed Pakistan and a Taliban-run Afghanistan with limited diplomatic shock absorbers. If you didn't know, there's a huge border trade between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Not only do goods flow through Afghanistan on their way to other countries, but trade between Afghanistan and Pakistan is billions of dollars. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Who knew? It's a lot. Every time something like this happens, border checkpoints are closed. There's economic impacts on both sides. The February 24th border exchange, that's one of those early warnings when things are going to go wrong. If the United Nations continues to report civilian harm, the narrative tips against Pakistan. But that kind of thing provides oxygen for recruiting within the TTP and ISIS-K messaging. And it also reduces the U.S. ability to operate counterterrorism operations. We don't have the troops and the military infrastructure that we had before we pulled out of Afghanistan. So we're really not running a lot of these strike packages that we were at the height of the conflict along that border area. But we still do some work. We still provide a tremendous amount of intelligence support to the Pakistani government so that they can, conduct operations against potential ISIS-K and TTP, really. We have not forgotten what they did back in 2008. You may remember that hotel bombing. If you watch any of the movies or read any of the books about the lead up towards the bin Laden raid, strikes hitting all of these districts with schools and madrasas in the reporting. This is going to make things so messy. It's going to amplify internal displacement. It is going to create conditions that have historically correlated with militant regeneration. There's not a lot that the United States can do. We don't have much leverage inside Afghanistan. Stability falls now either on regional coercion and incentives from, say, like Pakistan, China, possibly Gulf mediators like Saudi Arabia. But we don't have U.S. boots on the ground. We don't have basing. Reuters has noted Saudi mediated soldier release kind of as the precedent for future negotiations, but this thing has been spiraling out of control. I mean, it really reached an uptick in 2023, and it has really gotten nasty the past couple of months. I would say looking forward, next 30-day predictions, I'll do my predictions on this one. You're probably going to see more border skirmishes and more strikes from Pakistan. I think that Pakistan is going to frame it as surgical strikes. Afghanistan, whether it's TTP or the Taliban in Kabul, are going to say, you hit civilian targets. There were civilian collateral damage. They're probably both right. Taliban is going to condemn it. They're going to threaten it. Both sides posture for the domestic audience while really having zero control over TTP or ISIS-K. The risk, the worst case scenario is that there's a very high casualty, like 2008 Marriott Hotel bombing retaliatory attack in Pakistan that the TTP takes credit for. That is going to trigger a massive response by Pakistan. The Taliban in Kabul, you're talking 150,000 by some estimations. TTP, Pakistani Taliban, 10,000 at best. But they're dispersed in a mountainous region that is extraordinarily hard to find. Not the mountain. They know where the mountain is. Shut up. It's hard to fight a mountain war like that. It just is. It just is. Everything is exponentially harder in a mountainous environment. Artillery, aircraft, you have problems with them. To get things at altitude, it is hard. Casualty counts, target identity, all of it's going to remain contested. It's been hard enough for Reuters to do independent reporting on anything that's taken place. Yeah. So that's pretty much it for the 26th of February on the SITREP edition. I hope that you have learned something. I have appreciated all of the support that you have shown me during this project. I'm going to continue to expand and grow with you as well. So if you have any questions, comments, or complaints, please feel free to email, and we will respond to each and every email, provided that it's respondable. If you send me something that is just vomit, I have a hard time responding to that. So constructive criticism, if you're going to criticize. If you have an idea for a show, somebody you'd like to see on, we do have a tremendous lineup in store for you. Episodes will be dropping within the week with fresh new content. So with that being said, I wish everybody a great weekend. If Iran should decide to be invaded, we'll break in with a SITREP on that. Otherwise, until next time, I am Brad Colbert, the Iceman, reminding everybody to stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.